So I'm, of course, here in Kingston, Jamaica, and it's the morning after the first day of Grand Slam track in Kingston. And, you know, we'd been waiting for this moment for over a year at this point. Michael Johnson kind of announced things, I think, January, February 2024. And the first, athlete was announced in June with City McLauglin-Levrone last year. And now we actually saw some action on the track. And, of course, there's been various different, takes and commentary. But first off, before I dive into my own thoughts, what I'm going to specifically talk about is the success of Grand Slam track and almost conceptually like how we define success based on a lot of comments that we've been seeing online. Now, first thing though, definitely check out Citius Mag, myself, Chris Chavez, Aisha Pratt-Lear, Eric Jenkins. We've been doing recaps. We're going to be doing recaps every single day after the meet. We already have day one out. Go check that out on the Citius Mag YouTube channel. We're gonna have day 2 and day 3, so be sure to tune in for that. Also, follow Citius Mag on Instagram, on Twitter, all the updates. But also, I wanna give a huge shout out to the people who have been working at Grand Slam track. And y'all know who you are. I'm not gonna call out specific names, don't wanna leave anybody out, but also wanna make sure that it's just like general across the board. Shout out to the people who have been putting Grand Slam track together. This has been a very, very, very big effort. I'm gonna talk about a little bit why it's bigger than you actually think, in this video. But shout out to y'all. Shout out to the athletes who I've, had the opportunity. I truly don't take it for granted, the fact that I have the chance to be able to talk with so many of y'all, if you're watching, y'all athletes, after you compete, in tough times, bad times, great times, positive times, whatever it may be. So shout out to all of y'all. Now, first thing I want to dive into is just a very, very quick kind of high level recap and kind of experience from my end. If you want my in-depth details, go check out the Citius Mag podcast. We did a recap of the actual performances. But day one, it started off, of course, with a few fans, very few fans in the stand. And I'll be completely honest, I was a bit nervous to start off, right? It was maybe an hour before, Gabby Thomas was about to run in the 200. And I was like, man, like the stadium is kind of empty. Also, I'm coming from the context of, I was at Champs last week. So, perception for me might be a little bit different. But as the meet went on, despite there not being a lot of fans at the start, the meet went on, more people started to fill up the grandstand, and it got very, very loud. And by the end of the meet, right, by the time we got to the men's 100-meter dash, like, it was really loud. The energy was there. So it was a very, very exciting meet overall from my experience. Again, like I said, initially, I was a little worried. I was like, man, the stadium's kind of empty, but the meet progressively got better and better in terms of the experience and the fans in the stand. Now, I'm gonna dive into the crowd a little bit later as well, but wanna talk a little bit about the races. And race-wise, the day one races proved to me why the Grand Slam track model actually does work in terms of the competition, the amount of money that's being given out, all the opportunities for these athletes. A couple different things, right? The men's 100-meter dash, that was one of the more high-quality 100-meter fields that we've ever seen, probably the most high-quality we've ever seen at the top of April. Remember, we are in essentially the first weekend of April, and we're seeing this high quality of a 100-meter field on the men's side. Very, very, very great race, and it delivered with a photo finish essentially to the line, separated by 100th of a second between Kenny B and Oblique Seville. Look at the men's 400, right? You had another high quality race, basically an Olympic quality final. The only person missing here was Quincy Hall, but outside of that, you had a challenger in Chris Bailey actually get a win over this Olympic quality field and run almost a personal best, an extremely fast time, even though, time is not the focus here, but that was very high quality. You saw Nikki Hiltz take down a very strong 800-meter field where Nikki wasn't, considered one of the favorites. Nikki is a 15-miler as opposed to an 800-meter runner, but the competition, very close race, some drama in it, that actually really did deliver, right? So I think those races kind of highlight how Grand Slam track as an entity in terms of its races and its competitions truly did deliver, on day one. On top of that, also the strategy, like I was saying, the money aspect, the points aspect, that actually did show itself in a few different ways on day one as well. Look at Gabby Thomas. In the 200 meters, she was clearly the favorite to get the win, and which she did very comfortably against the rest of the field. Went out aggressive, out of lane 7, whatever it is. But then you had Marlita Paulino, who was in second place. She's not the greatest of 200-meter runners, but out on the inside lane in lane 3, she knew that, okay, if I want to be competitive overall, I need to finish well in this 200. So now going into the 400 the following day, I could really show myself in quote unquote my better event. So that, played into the strategy and excitement of Grand Slam track here. Also, same thing happened in the 100. Kenny B on paper isn't, wasn't the best 100-meter sprinter in that field, despite making the Olympic final, et cetera, but he showed that, okay, I won the 100, or I needed to win the 100 going into the 200. Hopefully that makes things a little bit easier. He'll still have competition, but that plays into the strategy of Grand Slam track that I really did like. Same thing with Chris Bailey. I don't think he's run a 200 in 5 or 6 years or something like that, or maybe he hasn't run a high quality one. I don't think he's ever broken 21 seconds in the 200. So he now wins the 400, and how is he gonna place in the 200 to hopefully maintain his lead, or maintain, his strong point scoring situation to, get a good payday. All that is strategy in these races. Finally, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, she dominated the 400-meter hurdles. That was a foregone conclusion. But look who finished in second place, Dalilah Muhammad. On paper, in my predictions, y'all saw, I didn't think Dalilah Muhammad was going to do as well, but she came out here out of lane 2, finished second place. That probably gives her more confidence going into the 400, thinking, okay, maybe I can finish a little bit higher overall in the standings, make a little bit more money. That's something that, I really did like overall about Grand Slam track on day 1. Now, let's talk about the experience. Let's dive a little bit into the experience. I told you that at the start, I was a little nervous, not too many fans in the crowd, but it got better and better as the day went on. After interviewing essentially all the athletes who competed, the athletes really, really did love the meet and the entire experience, right? So they said that the setup and the rollout of how Grand Slam track has been doing things, of course, over the past couple months, but then the press conference yesterday and, even today with the rollout and announcements, all that stuff, the athletes really did like it. And apologies for the background noise, but athletes really did like it. On top of that, they did like the energy and the fans, right, in the stadium. They really did love that. And, for context, I'll be honest. I know that some athletes may have been, with a little bit less of a crowd compared to like later in the day, but overall, athletes said that they really did like the energy, the crowd, the atmosphere, all that. They noted that the track felt great and they loved just the stadium and competing there. Many of them, like a Gabby Thomas for the first time. Some of them, like a Fred Curley, he's competed here many times. So different things like that, I think really did play into athletes. So overall, athletes seemed to enjoy it, which is a very, very important part. Now, on top of that, fans who I spoke to, they also said that they loved the meet as well. They loved the energy. They loved being able to see the top stars competing in Kingston, something you don't see very often outside of, of course, Jamaican National Championships, but internationally, maybe Racers Grand Prix or Jamaican Invitational. Doesn't happen very often. Like I said, Gabby Thomas, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, first time competing in Kingston, Jamaica. Also, they got to see big head-to-heads. That men's 100-meter dash is not a field that you've seen in Jamaica before, right? The women's 400-meter hurdles, that's not a field that you've gotten to see in Jamaica before. So they love to see some of the high-quality head-to-heads with some of these big stars, and then getting to see a bunch of world-leading times. We saw Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, we saw Chris Bailey, and yes, the focus is not the times, but the fans actually did love that experience on a whole. Really, really good takeaway from there. For you though, for y'all watching, I want you to comment below on what you thought about the broadcast at home, right? How did you watch the meet? Did you watch on Peacock? Did you watch on YouTube? Did you watch on BBC, on TVJ, right? How did you actually watch it? Because the experience in the stadium is going to be very different than what the experience was like for you at home. So I would truly love to know what it was like for y'all. I only caught some clips of the broadcast kind of, early this morning, but let me know what you thought about it from watching at home. I would love to hear that. Now, this is the big discussion that I want to dive into, and it may get controversial, may get not. I want to talk about success and then want to talk about the Diamond League comparison. So first thing, to you, what does success mean, right? What does success mean? And I'll kind of ask this as a question because I truly want to know what success means, of course, in the context of Grand Slam track. Many people right now online are talking about the crowd size, right? How there was no one in the stands. It was completely empty, right? We were promised a packed out stadium, all that stuff. And I wonder if this, for you, for people online, if this is a singular measure of success. Is it like, because there's no crowds, then it was a failure? Or is this one of the measures and maybe one of the more important measures of success where, yes, other things were also important, but because there was no crowd, that's the most important thing. And that means that it's, 75% failure, even if there's 25% success. Or is it maybe not really the biggest measure and it's, maybe that thought process, maybe online conversation is just superseding what you as an individual or what you as a, group of people are thinking is the more important thing, whether that's the competition, the head-to-heads, the world leading marks, or, the fact that we see these top stars, right? That's my question. What does success mean to you? And specifically, is it the fact that crowd size is the only measure for success? Because in general, I feel like that's the conversation online right now. The crowds weren't there, the crowds weren't there. And sure, maybe it's justified, but one thing that's important is Grand Slam track kind of set a very high bar, where they are starting off in Kingston, Jamaica. Kingston, Jamaica, of course, is, you know, a massive, massive stadium. I think it holds 30 to 35,000 people in that singular stadium. And for context, I think 30,000 people is the minimum requirement for a World Championships to be able to host it, right? That is the minimum requirement that World Athletics set for a city to be able to host the World Championships. World Championships, literally the biggest event in our sport outside of the Olympic Games. That is the minimum requirement, 30,000 people, a 30,000 seated venue. That's what we had here in Kingston. So expectations were very, very high. I don't think the stadium was ever going to get 100% packed, or 99% packed, or whatever it may be, right? There were so many people, but our expectations were definitely skewed towards believing that potentially the stadium would be, filled up and packed, especially coming off, champs last weekend. You would expect, oh, maybe we could bring out all these other people. I think that us as fans, maybe our expectations were set there as well. But I don't know, I feel like it's a little skewed considering this is the first day of the first meet of a new venture in track and field, something that has never occurred before. So all that needs to be put in context. And again, this is Kingston, Jamaica. Yes, Jamaicans love track and field, but look at the additional context here. It's a Friday evening of a work day here in Jamaica, right? The Champs Stadium doesn't even fill up, from Tuesday to Friday. And even Saturday for Champs, it only really starts to fill up in like the early afternoon going into the evening. So maybe in previous years it was like filled up all the time, but just for context, I've been to Champs, 2 times now, last year and this year. So I think that context is definitely necessary. And even with Champs, right, that's about schools and families and, competitors and, teams and things like that. So you can have an age group race of, 12-year-olds running, and people may not know who those athletes are, but they're cheering because they got, Kingston College or Calabar on their chest, or Edwin Allen or Heidel or whatever it is. They're representing a school. That's different than professional track and field, where it's an individual sport. We don't have teams. Shout out to my man, Coach Rob, always kind of advocating for teams. That's another discussion to have. But also on top of that, about half of the Jamaican, stars, as you would call it, weren't competing specifically on day one. So yes, you had Oblique Seville, but you didn't have like an Akira Nugent, who is one of the top, Jamaican stars. Also, yes, we'll acknowledge you don't have Sharika Jackson, you don't have Kashane Thompson. So look at Jamaican National Championships, where yes, the grandstand is going to be packed out, but we don't have those top stars who are competing for Jamaica. And Oblique Seville probably got the loudest crowd reaction out of any athlete, probably just by my ears. Y'all can kind of let me know if it was different, but even more so than Gabby Thomas or Sydney McLauglin-Levrone, or other athletes who are definitely on paper bigger global stars. But even someone like Fred Curley, Gabby, Sydney, they are more global in terms of stardom and attention and fandom than Oblique Seville. But in Jamaica, Oblique Seville is that guy. He is the star, or at least, of course, one of those stars. So I think that Jamaican fans are going to show up for their stars, but it's going to be a little bit different when you have global athletes who aren't necessarily Jamaican. So just want to put that in context as well. I think attendance is going to be better on day 2. And by the time you're watching this, day 2 may be going off as well. I'm not sure exactly when I'll put this out, but day 2 may be going on already, right? But we're going to have, more sprint finals, or quote unquote finals, right? The second, tier to finish off, whether it's the, men's long sprints, or the men's short sprints, right? The women's long sprints, all those kind of things. We're also going to have the start of the women's short hurdles, the women's, short sprints. All those things are going to be happening on day 2. So we'll probably get a few more fans. And it's a Saturday evening. Folks aren't going to be at work, coming from work, traffic, all that stuff is going to be slightly different on Saturday. But this probably, in my opinion, might provide more confidence going into Miramar, where Miramar, it's a smaller venue, so they'll be able to, likely pack out that venue, but they'll be able to focus more on some of the other things that maybe did go well, or maybe some things that didn't go well, but are outside of this larger conversation of crowd size, like all that stuff that, of course, is going on online. But I do want to note, before talking about the Diamond League, which I think is an important conversation, Grand Slam Track should take note of the conversation online. Now, that's not to say that everyone online who's complaining about crowd size is justified. There's a trillion, shout out to y'all know who you are, trillion of y'all who are just trolling online. I interact with some of y'all, whatever it is, but some of y'all who just troll online for the sake of trolling, some of y'all who are just like jumping onto the conversation like, yeah, crowd size, whatever. But I think Grand Slam Track shouldn't lose focus on the fact that some people are legitimately, complaining about whether it's crowd size or other things, because when you look forward in the long term, whether it's, this year with the next 3 meets, or in the future, year after year, fans being invested, fans being on the side of Grand Slam track is going to be very, very important. Whether we like it or not, if fans are not invested in Grand Slam track, then there isn't going to be the long-term success. But that's, longer conversation. This is just day one, so we'll see. Now, I want to finish off talking about the Diamond League, and I know I'm kind of going on for a little bit here. We'll see if we can cut this down. But talking about the Diamond League, I need us to stop comparing Grand Slam track to the Diamond League. In my opinion, as of right now, there truly isn't a comparison. And this is me getting the chance to think about it a little bit more over the past couple days, and especially after day one. One thing is that the Diamond League, essentially what they did with the Diamond League in 2010 is they took existing meets that have existed for literally decades, low-key over almost a century of track and field. They took existing meets and simply labeled them as Diamond League meets. Yes, they added some structures and some points and whatever, but they took meets that already existed. Fans, athletes, people have been showing up to those meets years after years after years. All of a sudden in 2010, it's not like these fans stopped showing up to the meets. There just was a new logo on it. Now, let me give some context, right? 2010 is when the Diamond League first started, and there were 14 meets on the calendar. But let's go down the list. I'm gonna quickly go down the list to see when those meets actually did start, because none of them started in 2010. For example, Shanghai and the New York City Diamond League, they were existing since 2005, right? New York City was the Adidas Grand Prix. Doha, Birmingham, they existed since the 1990s. Rome, Paris, Monaco, they existed since the 1980s, right? Lausanne, pre-classic, Brussels, they existed since the 1970s. You even had Stockholm, which existed, it started in 1967. Even London started in the 1950s, I think 1953. Zurich, the Zurich, meet, right? World-class Zurich, it started in 1920s, I think 1928. You're talking about almost a century of Zurich existing. So this context is important because you're talking about meets that already existed, but the Diamond League simply placed the label of Diamond League on them. I was a fan of track and field in 2009, and I remember watching the Golden League. I remember watching Zurich Golden League occurring. I remember watching Brussels Golden League occurring. The next year, those meets still occurred. They were just called the Diamond League with different names. Yes, again, I know that the structure is a little bit different, but the meets still occurred. Similar athletes were competing in those meets year after year, right? Grand Slam track, the reason why the comparison to me is not good is because Grand Slam track is completely brand new. Kingston Grand Slam track did not exist. Literally did not exist last year. We're going to have Miramar. That did not exist. You're going to have Philly. You're going to have LA. That did not exist. Remember, they're not replacing meets. There's no meet that existed. Well, you did have meets in Miramar, but you have a Miramar, meet going on this weekend. That's always occurred. Grand Slam track is going to be completely different. In Philly, there was no major professional meet there. Kingston didn't have a major professional meet at the top of April. Even in LA, the LA Grand Prix has already existed. I think it was canceled this year, but despite that, it doesn't matter. It's not like Grand Slam track was replacing LA. I think those things need to be put in context. One thing that I kind of thought about is, in New York City, we had, or at least used to have, maybe there's still some, we used to have these drugstores called Duane Reade. And Duane Reade, they were on like every single corner or every single neighborhood, whatever it is. In 2010, same time as the Diamond League, funny enough, but Walgreens, they actually bought out Duane Reade. They purchased Duane Reade and they took ownership, and over the next couple years, you started to see some of these existing Duane Reades in New York City. They changed their name to Walgreens. Some of them literally just took off Duane Reade and put the name Walgreens on it. Literally, where I live in New York, there is a Walgreens I go to all the time. I can still see the name of Duane Reade, like kind of the faded name, and it just has a Walgreens, label on top of it. But at the end of the day, I'm still getting prescriptions from there. I'm still getting, supplies from there. I'm still getting, whatever things I need for my house from that same store. It's not like, one day the name just changed. The store didn't change. That's different than a completely brand new store being built from the ground up and being placed on the corner of a neighborhood. They're not going to be able to, start making as much money as a Duane Reade, which then changed to a Walgreens, right? It's different. You're not going to see as many people showing up to that new store because it's something completely new in the neighborhood. People are going to be like, oh, I'm still going to what I already know and what I've been going to, where I've been getting my goods for the past years or whatever it is. I'm looking at Grand Slam track and the Diamond League as a similar situation. The Diamond League, those meets have existed literally for years and decades and almost a century in terms of like the Zurich Diamond League. Grand Slam track is brand new. So I don't know if that was a great analogy, but just my thoughts in terms of that there. So in summary, because of course this is getting a little bit long. In the stadium, I definitely was initially worried. There weren't many fans gonna start things off, but as the meet went on, you know, the crowd did start to, you know, get louder and louder. They started to fill up the seats and all that. And by the end of the meet, it was very, very exciting. So I did really love that. Of course, the athletes, the fans, the media, from my experience and conversations, people really did love day one at least. You know, we'll still see things, you know, get better. I think that day two will be more exciting because we'll have, you know, a lot more, especially on the sprint side. We're gonna see so many different events going down on day two, which is today, by the time you're watching this, or maybe you're watching this afterwards. I truly, truly encourage you to think if crowd size is your only measure of success, or if you're maybe just echoing other comments, or maybe it's one measure of your success, you know, of Grand Slam track in day one, and maybe you're just kind of, the perception is skewed or whatever it may be. I truly, truly implore you to think about that, right? Even if you're echoing, you know, some of the other comments, you may agree with them. There may be a kernel of truth, you know, to something there, but I want you to truly kind of reflect on your thoughts about the crowd size as an individual. What did you think about the crowd size and how it, you know, related to Grand Slam track on day one? And then outside of the crowd size, did you think that the meet itself was a good meet? And could it have been seen as a success if you kind of eliminate that aspect of crowd size? And then two others, right? Do you think that having Miramar next with a little bit smaller of a crowd, because yes, I know that's a conversation, will be a positive, right? It'll allow you to allow Grand Slam track to maybe focus in on some of the good things that did occur during the meet. And then also, try not to compare the Diamond League to Grand Slam track. Think of the analogy that I gave where Diamond League meets have been occurring for decades. Grand Slam track is brand new. Diamond League literally just switched the name of some of these meets and just slapped on Diamond League to it. World Class Zurich is still World Class Zurich. Athletes have been competing there since the 1920s, but it's just under a new name, you know, in terms of the Diamond League. Think about that. But let me know what you think. This is just day one for me. Again, you may be watching this later. Really appreciate y'all. Be sure to like the video if you haven't already. Also, check out my man, Coach Rob. He did a great recap of the meet of day one. Go check out his video. I'll link it, of course, in the description. Check out CDS Mag. We have, you know, daily recaps of Grand Slam track while we're here in Kingston. And we're going to be doing the same as we go to Miami, as we go to Philly, and as we go to Los Angeles. So be sure to follow CDS Mag. And shout out to everyone, like I said, whether it's a Grand Slam track, whether it's the athletes, whether it's the media, everybody for putting in the work to make something like this come together. But always appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.